Emily loved the road, but not the one that opens up ahead on clear, sunny days. She'd always been drawn to dark, abandoned highways, where one was alone with nature itself, with one's fears and thoughts. But today something was wrong. Her heart whimpered longingly, as if a premonition of evil loomed invisibly over the road. The Maine woodlands, vast, silent, merciless, did not thrill her now. She had lost the road. Perhaps it was all the fatigue. In recent months, Emily's life had seemed like one continuous race for survival. Working to the limit, a constant lack of time, and the lingering shadow of the past. A few years ago, she'd already experienced fear on the roads of Maine. That night, her life nearly ended when she saw emergency lights on a bridge. An accident she caused. That accident took a life, but it was guilt that took her heart. She always heard their whispers, the whispers of those she couldn't save. They came to her in her nightmares like forest spirits, giving her no peace. And now she was back on this road. The Jeep lurched along the abandoned highway. The headlights couldn't penetrate the thickening darkness. Emily stared at the dial. 2302. Her phone had long since lost connection, and the GPS was showing an unknown location. There was nothing on the map ahead, just the forest, hundreds of miles away. Once again, I'm alone at the edge of the world, she thought. Fatigue stabbed at her eyes, but the thought of stopping in this slumbering void was unbearable. The forest overhung the road, the trees stretching their branches like eerie guards, as if trying to keep her on this crazy road. Suddenly, the headlights snatched something up ahead. Emily slowed down and took a closer look. An abandoned gas station stood at the edge of the road like an old monument to a bygone era. She hadn't seen people in hours, and this building among the trees gave her an unfamiliar feeling, rescue or trap? The windows were boarded up, the boards creaking in the wind as if protesting her approach. Emily stopped the car and shut off the engine. The silence deafened her, her heart pounding in her chest. Something on the walls of the gas station made her involuntarily flinch. Red stains. Fresh, scarlet, as if someone had just left them here, tossed in the mess. Like evidence of someone's struggle, someone's agonizing death. Emily's feet felt as if they'd burrowed into the ground, but she couldn't take her eyes off the place. God, what am I doing? Ran through her head. She knew she should get back in the car and just drive away. But something inside, some force she couldn't resist, made her take a step forward.
She gripped the doorknob. The feeling of being watched was unbearable. Every muscle in her body tensed, but curiosity overcame fear. The wind rustled quietly between the trees, cold as the breath of winter, reminding her of the ominous nights that had haunted her since that terrible day. Who's there? Her voice shook, echoing in the void and echoing off the walls of the old building. She didn't expect an answer, but she still wanted to hear it, like a strange attempt to connect with reality. Silence. Only the wind, tangled in the branches of the pines, seemed like a whisper of a forgotten world. But then the silence was broken by a creaking sound. The heavy, slow sound of a door opening. Emily turned sharply and stopped her gaze at the entrance to the building. The door was ajar, an icy wind blowing from inside. "You're still here," came a voice from the shadows. Emily's heart plummeted. Every instinct inside her screamed, "Run, save yourself." But her legs wouldn't listen, standing as if frozen. A man stepped out of the shadows. His clothes were in shreds, as if time had dragged on him. It was the gas station attendant, but not the one who was supposed to be behind the cash register. His face was disfigured, his eyes dead as glass. There was something inhuman in his movements, as if his body was being led by something invisible, like a marionette. "You're not real," she squeezed out, feeling her body refuse its own commands. "You're not leaving," he replied, his voice like a whisper, full of unbearable cold. Emily tore toward the car door. The muscles in her legs burned, every movement difficult, like a nightmare when your body wouldn't listen and you couldn't move fast enough. She slid out into the street, but tripped again, her foot meeting the hard ground. The pain in front of her eyes darkened. Panic drove her forward. There was no stopping. The wind increased, now sounding like whistling, like voices merging into an eerie cacophony. A cold hand gripped her shoulder. She felt the icy touch on her skin, but didn't dare turn around. Everything inside her was boiling with terror. "You're not going to leave," he said again, close now, almost touching her ear with his ominous whisper. Emily thrashed around in a panic, like a cornered animal. Her mind was torn between fear and a desperate desire to understand what was happening. The words stuck in her head, "You're not leaving." That voice wasn't just a threat. It was an echo of her past, like her own thoughts wrapped in someone else's body. She finally broke free of his icy grip and fell to the ground. Dirt and sand clung to her face, and she felt her heart pounding in her chest, threatening to tear her apart. She seemed to be on the verge of fainting, but something in her mind kept her on the surface. Not fear of death, but something else, guilt. It all came back to that night. The accident on the bridge. The moment she'd seen someone's lights and tried to avoid the collision, she caused the disaster herself. Someone's life had been ruined, and Emily, who had miraculously escaped death, had spent the rest of her life trying to run away from what had happened. But something inside her knew that this path of escape could not be endless. "Why?" she whispered, struggling to catch her breath. "Why won't you leave me alone?" There was no answer. There was only darkness, gusting wind, and desolation. She could feel him. She felt his presence. This gas station attendant, or what he was, wasn't just a ghost, it was something more, dark and ancient as the night itself. "You're still here because you didn't choose this road," the hoarse voice said again. "It chose you." Emily stood up, leaning against the car. Her hands trembled. Her mind, recently clouded with fear, was now beginning to realize. This road. It was alive. And this place. It wasn't just an abandoned gas station. It was more than that. Something she couldn't fully comprehend, but which was an integral part of herself. It was as if her surroundings were beginning to change. The trees themselves seemed different to her now, not just lifeless trunks, but something hostile. Their branches reached out to her as if they wanted to grasp her, like fingers reaching out from the darkness. "I don't want to die here," Emily whispered, her voice sounding weaker than she'd expected. She moved toward the forest, driven by a strange force. Logic told her it was the wrong decision, but something inside pushed her forward. The branches of the trees, like hands, tried to grab her, but she kept going. Each step came with an effort, as if the ground itself was against her movement. The darkness thickened. Every movement along the forest path echoed in her head. Someone's footsteps followed her. Not a ghost, not a person, but space itself, every branch, every stone in the road. Everything around her came alive, reminding her that she had never left this forest, never left this night. Emily remembered the gas station attendant's words, "You're not leaving." They weren't a threat, but a warning. The place would not let her go. It absorbed her fear, her guilt. Everything she once tried to forget was now back, materializing in these shadows. The noise behind her grew louder. She turned around and saw him. The gas station attendant was standing in front of her again, but this time his face was different. It was no longer disfigured by the oil of fear. Some strange smile appeared on his face. His eyes, empty and glassy, seemed to be watching her from within, seeing what she herself did not want to see. "I'm here because you're here," he said. Emily pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart pounding. "Why?" She wanted to scream, but her voice refused to obey. "You thought you could run away, But this road isn't just a path through the woods, he continued, taking a step closer. It's a path through your past. Emily stood as if chained. It was clear to her in that moment he was a guardian of sorts, the spirit of this road, and he was connected to her on a deeper level than she realized. "What do you want from me?" she finally squeezed out. The gas station attendant slowly moved closer, his voice becoming almost a whisper. "You know the answer to that yourself. This night isn't over until you accept it." "Accept what?" she shouted, her voice sounding hoarse and helpless. She was trying to figure out exactly what was required of her, what she was missing, what lay beyond this road, beyond her past. "Myself," he answered. Emily suddenly felt something inside her snap. All the years she'd spent running from the memories, all the nightmares, the guilt, the fear, all the things she tried to hide from, were now in full force in front of her. It became clear to her that this night, this road, all of it was no accident. She couldn't run away from this place. She always came back to the place she had tried to escape from. She settled to the ground with her head down, closing her eyes. The surrounding forest, the sound of the wind, everything was suddenly distant, as if space and time itself had disappeared. The gas station attendant was no longer standing in front of her. Just emptiness. But something inside had changed. It was as if the burden she had been carrying all these years had become lighter. She accepted what had happened. The death, the guilt, her mistakes. And in that moment, the night around her began to dissolve. Emily opened her eyes. The forest was no longer so hostile, and the tree branches were no longer reaching out to grab her. But she knew this was only the beginning. This journey wasn't over yet. She had not yet stepped into the light. But now she could move forward. She stood up, looking at the abandoned gas station that seemed like a distant memory now. Deep down she knew that the darkness would still return, that the road would call to her again. But now she was ready to face it.